What did medieval peasants actually eat? You know that image of a medieval peasant sitting alone in a dark hut, eating grey, watery gruel with their hands? It's wrong. Almost everything you've been told about the medieval diet is a myth, and the truth? It's stranger, smarter, and way more appetizing than you think. For the next 20 minutes, I'm going to show you what medieval peasants actually ate, and by the end, you might be jealous of a 14th century farmer's lunch. Let's start with the most important food in medieval Europe: bread. But not the bread you're picturing. Medieval peasants ate dark, dense, heavy bread made from rye or barley, not wheat. Wheat was expensive. It was for lords. Peasants got the dark stuff, and they ate a lot of it, up to 2 pounds per person per day. And here's where it gets unexpected. That bread wasn't just food. It was a plate. The medieval trencher was a thick slice of stale bread used exactly like a plate. You'd pile your meat and sauce on top, eat everything, and then, if you were hungry enough, eat the gravy-soaked bread underneath. If you weren't, you tossed it to the dogs. 0 dishes. A medieval peasant's kitchen produced less waste than your kitchen does right now. But bread wasn't even half the story. Here's what nobody tells you. A medieval peasant drank more alcohol than water, and not because they wanted to get drunk. Medieval water was questionable. Rivers ran through towns that had no sewage systems. Wells got contaminated. So peasants drank ale, weak ale, around 1 to 2% alcohol, basically medieval Gatorade. Men, women, children, everyone drank it all day. A typical adult peasant consumed about a gallon of ale daily. This wasn't a party, this was survival hydration. Now let's talk about the real MVP of medieval cooking: pottage. If you lived in the Middle Ages, you ate pottage. Every day, sometimes multiple times a day. It's a thick stew of grains and whatever vegetables were available, cooked in a single iron pot that hung over the fire. But here's the part that changes everything. That pot never stopped cooking. The fire stayed lit. The pot stayed on. Every morning you'd add fresh water, more grains, whatever vegetables you had. The stew at the bottom might be days old. The stew at the top was fresh. This continuous cooking extracted maximum nutrition from every ingredient and meant nothing was ever wasted. And here's where archaeology proves it wasn't bland. In the 1990s, archaeologists excavated a medieval village in Northamptonshire, England, called West Cotton. They scraped the inside of 700-year-old cooking pots and ran chemical analysis, lipid residue testing, and found traces of cabbage, leeks, onions, and garlic embedded in the clay. These peasants weren't eating flavorless mush. They were making the same aromatic base, alliums, herbs, slow-cooked vegetables, that chefs use today. The foundation of French and Italian cooking was being practiced by medieval farmers who couldn't read. Here's where the peasants only ate gruel story completely falls apart. Medieval peasants had access to more protein than most people realize. Dairy was everywhere. Most peasant households kept at least 1 cow or a few goats. Milk became cheese and butter, and unlike today, medieval cheese wasn't a luxury. It was a staple. Hard, aged cheese kept for months without refrigeration. It was portable, calorie-dense, and eaten daily. Then there were legumes. Peas, beans, and lentils grew in every peasant garden. Archaeological evidence from across England and France shows that legumes were planted in massive quantities, far more than just for their own table. The surplus was dried, stored, and eaten through winter. But let's talk about protein quality for a second, because it's better than you think. When you combine whole grain bread with cheese and legume stew, which is exactly what peasants ate daily, you get a complete amino acid profile, every essential protein building block the human body needs. This wasn't accidental nutrition. Centuries of trial and error produced a diet that was genuinely balanced. And we haven't even gotten to meat yet. Real quick, If you're surprised by what medieval peasants actually ate, imagine what else you've gotten wrong about history. Hit subscribe and let's fix that together. Now, the meat. And this is where it gets genuinely shocking. So, did peasants eat meat? The answer is yes. But not the way you think. Medieval peasants didn't eat steak. They didn't eat roast chicken every Sunday. Large livestock, cattle and sheep, were too valuable to slaughter. Cows produced milk. Sheep produced wool. You didn't kill your dairy cow any more than a modern farmer would kill their tractor. But that doesn't mean they went without. Pigs were the exception. And here's why. Pigs could feed themselves. Hannage rights. The legal right to let their pigs forage in the Lord's forest during autumn. The pigs ate acorns, nuts, roots, and mushrooms. They required almost no feeding. Then, in November or December, you slaughtered them, usually one pig per household per year, and every single part was used. The meat was salted, smoked, or hung to dry. The blood became black pudding. The fat was rendered for cooking. The offal was eaten immediately. Nothing was wasted. But here's the thing. Peasants actually ate more meat variety than most of us do today. They hunted rabbits, hares, and birds. They fished in rivers and streams. And in a practice that modern eaters would never consider, they ate hedgehogs baked in clay. When you cracked the clay open, the spines came off with it. Is that appealing? Not to us. But it was free protein that walked into the garden. Medieval peasants couldn't afford to be picky, and as a result, their diet was far more biologically diverse than the average modern Westerner who eats the same 3 animals on rotation. Now let's talk about the most overlooked part of the medieval diet. The garden. Almost every peasant household, even the poorest, had a garden plot, usually behind the cottage, usually managed by women. And these gardens were far more sophisticated than we give them credit for. They grew onions, leeks, garlic, and cabbages, root vegetables like parsnips, turnips, and carrots. Though medieval carrots were purple or white, not orange, they grew herbs, sage, thyme, rosemary, parsley, not just for flavor, but for medicine. Sage was believed to cure everything from snake bites to memory loss, and archaeological evidence shows it in almost every medieval garden site. But the real genius of the medieval garden wasn't what they grew. It was what they foraged. Peasants foraged constantly. Nettles, dandelion greens, wild garlic, sorrel, wild mushrooms, berries, nuts. The medieval countryside was a free supermarket if you knew what to pick. And peasants, living their entire lives on the same land, knew every edible plant within walking distance. This foraging provided nutrients that cultivated crops couldn't. Wild greens are higher in vitamins and minerals than domesticated ones. A medieval peasant eating wild nettle soup was getting micronutrients that a modern person eating bagged spinach from a supermarket might not be getting. There's one more piece of this puzzle, and it's the one that destroys the miserable peasant stereotype entirely. Feast days. The medieval calendar was packed with them. Christmas, Easter, Saints' Days, harvest festivals, Plough Monday, May Day, depending on the region and century. Somewhere between 80 and 115 days a year were officially designated as feast or rest days by the church. And on feast days, peasants ate like kings. Roast meat was served, fresh bread, sometimes even wheat bread, was baked. Pies, puddings, and sweetened dishes that never appeared on ordinary days were prepared in quantity, and most importantly, the lord of the manor was expected to feed his peasants on certain feast days. This was part of what historians call the moral economy, an unwritten social contract. If a lord skimped on the Christmas feast, his peasants remembered, and in a world where peasant labor was the entire economic engine, a lord who violated the moral economy was a lord asking for trouble. The 1381 Peasants' Revolt in England wasn't just about taxes. It was about food. It was about access. It was about the social contract being broken. When we talk about medieval food, we're really talking about medieval power and the daily negotiations that kept that power in check. So here's the question you should be asking right now. Was a medieval peasant's diet better than yours? In some ways, genuinely yes. A medieval peasant ate zero ultra-processed food, zero refined sugar, zero artificial preservatives. Their grains were whole grains. Nothing was stripped, bleached, or refined, because they didn't have the technology. Their vegetables were locally grown, seasonal, and often foraged, meaning higher nutrient density. Their meat came from animals that ate natural diets and lived outside. They were also physically active all day, not in a gym, but in the fields, which meant their caloric intake, which could reach 3,500 to 4,000 calories per day during harvest season, was actually burned. The medieval peasant wasn't counting macros. They were just living. And here's the kicker, they wasted nothing. A modern American household throws away roughly 30 to 40% of its food. A medieval peasant household threw away almost nothing. The pottage pot absorbed everything. Bones became stock. Stale bread became trenchers, then animal feed. Garden waste went to the pigs or the compost. The medieval kitchen was a closed loop. So the next time someone shows you a movie where medieval peasants are huddled in the dark eating watery grey slop out of a dirty bowl, you'll know that image says more about us, about our need to believe the past was miserable, than it says about the past itself. Medieval peasants ate dark bread and pottage and cheese and ale. They ate fresh vegetables from their own gardens and wild greens from the hedgerows. They ate pork on feast days and rabbit when they could catch one. They worked hard, burned massive calories, and ate a diet that, while inconsistent and seasonally fragile, was far more diverse, nutrient-dense, and sustainable than the one most of us eat today. Was their life hard? Absolutely. Brutally hard. No refrigeration, constant threat of famine, one bad harvest away from starvation. But their food was smarter than you think. If this changed how you picture the medieval world, there's a lot more where that came from. We've got videos coming on how Victorian women survived arsenic-laced fashion, what sailors actually ate during months at sea, and the dark truth about gladiator deaths. Hit subscribe. The past is weirder than you think.